The unwritten rule of Riverside. Marcus Davis settled onto a worn park bench at Riverside Park, the late afternoon sun painting a warm, golden hue across the vibrant greenery. He turned a page in his book, a rare moment of peace and quiet away from the demanding world of his job. The park was his sanctuary, a place where the rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children could quiet the noise in his head. But today, that peace was short-lived. Across the sprawling lawn, Officer Brian Harkins patrolled his beat, his eyes scanning every face. Had walked these paths for 20 years, convinced he knew every stone and every soul in the city. When his gaze fell on Marcus, a flicker of suspicion ignited in his gut. A black man, sitting alone, too calm, too composed. Brian had seen a vague, flimsy report of a suspect, a general description that, to his biased mind, was enough. Never seen him around here before, Brian muttered under his breath, his hand instinctively tightening on his baton. Marcus felt the weight of the stare and looked up, meeting Brian's gaze. He knew that look, well, prejudice disguised as vigilance. It was a look that judged him not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. Marcus didn't flinch. He slowly closed his book, placing his finger on the marked page, and held the officer's gaze. Brian, unnerved by Marcus's composure, began to walk towards him. "Afternoon," he said, the politeness in his voice thin, stretched over a layer of suspicion. "Afternoon," Marcus replied, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to Brian's tension. His hands rested opally on the book in his lap. "Just enjoying the park." Brian's eyes darted from Marcus' face to the book. "It's a nice day," Marcus responded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Brian wasn't listening. He was fishing. "You from around here?" "I've been around," Marcus said, the non-answer only fueling Brian's suspicions. He shifted his weight, his stance becoming more aggressive. "Mind if I see Samid?" This was the line. Marcus knew his rights, knew he didn't have to comply, but he also knew that refusing would only escalate the situation. Yet, he wasn't going to let this officer intimidate him. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked, his tone measured. Brian bristled. That calm defiance was unsettling. "You will be if you don't cooperate." His hand hovered over his holster. Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath. "I'm just sitting in a park. Is there a law against that?" Brian's patience snapped. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, a hollow excuse even to his own ears. He stepped closer, towering over Marcus. "And what description is that?" Marcus asked quietly. Brian had no good answer, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "Don't get smart with me. Show me Samid, now." For a moment, they were locked in a silent standoff. Marcus knew he could push back, but today, he was weary. He decided to comply, for now. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Brian snatched the id, his eyes barely glancing at the name. He had already made up his mind. "Stand up," Brian ordered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but he suppressed it. He stood, turning around and allowing Brian to cuff him without resistance. He could feel the stares of passers-by, their silent judgments. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists as Brian led him to the patrol car. Inside the car, Marcus watched the city streets blur past, a deep weariness settling over him. He wasn't worried, he knew who he was, and he knew this officer would soon find out. But the exhaustion was profound. It was the weight of knowing that, despite his accomplishments, he was still just another black man in the eyes of men like Brian Harkins. At the precinct, Brian led Marcus through the bustling main hall. He avoided the curious glances of other officers, not yet ready to explain his flimsy arrest. He brought Marcus to the booking desk, where a young officer, named Jenkins, looked up, surprised. "What's this about?" Jenkins asked. "Caught him acting suspicious in the park," Brian replied, handing over Marcus' id. Jenkins's eyes flickered with a brief, masked recognition as he typed the information into the computer. "Captain Bennett's in our office," he said, handing the id back to Brian. "You'll need to take him to her." Brian stiffened. Captain Lavera Bennett was a stickler for procedure. He hadn't wanted to involve her. He knocked on her door and entered, guiding Marcus into a neat, organized office. Captain Bennett, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, looked up from her paperwork. "Officer Harkins," she said, her tone neutral. "What's this about?" "Caught this guy in the park, Captain," Brian said. His voice clipped. Acting suspicious. Captain Bennett's gaze shifted to Marcus, and again, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Is that so?" she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And did you have probable cause?" Brian hesitated. "He wouldn't cooperate, Captain." Captain Bennett leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on Brian. "Officer Harkins, why don't you step outside? I'd like to speak with Mr. Davis alone." Reluctantly, Brian released Marcus and left the office, closing the door behind him. "Mr. Davis," Bennett said, her demeanor softening. "I apologize for this misunderstanding." "No need, Captain," Marcus said with a small smile. "You're just doing your job." "I'm aware of who you are," Bennett continued, "but I need to handle this carefully. I have to ask, why didn't you just tell him?" Marcus's smile faded. "Because it shouldn't matter, Captain. My identity shouldn't be the reason he decides to treat me with respect." Bennett considered his words, then nodded in understanding. "You're right, it shouldn't." She stood up. "I'll call Officer Harkins back in. We'll resolve this." When Brian re-entered the office, he could sense the shift in the room's energy. "Mr. Davis here is not the man you were looking for," Bennett said, her voice firm. "You'll release him immediately." "But Captain." "Immediately, officer," she repeated, leaving no room for argument. Brian reached for the keys, his hands shaking slightly as the weight of his mistake began to settle in. As the handcuffs clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists, giving Brian a measured look. "Thank you, officer," he said, his tone calm but final. Brian swallowed hard, his face pale. "You're free to go." Marcus nodded and turned to Bennett. "I'll be in touch, Captain. There's still a lot to discuss." "I look forward to it, Mr. Davis," she replied. With that, Marcus walked out, leaving Brian standing there with a sinking feeling in his gut. The immediate confrontation was over, but the consequences were only just beginning. In the days that followed, Brian was placed on temporary leave. He sat through a tense internal affairs review, facing stern-faced officials and, to his dismay, Marcus Davis himself. Marcus's presence was like a punch to the gut, unflinching, a living reminder of his failure. "Your job is to protect and serve, Officer Harkins," Marcus said during the review, "not to judge people based on their appearance." Brian had no defense. He had let his biases guide his actions, and now he was facing the consequences. The investigation concluded with a clear verdict. Brian Harkins was to be terminated from his position. Captain Bennett called Marcus back in to inform him of the decision. "I believe it's a step in the right direction," she told him. "His actions were unacceptable, and his termination sends a clear message that racial profiling and the abuse of power will not be tolerated." "But firing one officer isn't enough," Marcus responded. "This is about more than one person. It's about the culture, the training, the biases that can influence decisions in the field." Bennett nodded, agreeing to work with him on implementing systemic changes, revising training programs, implementing new accountability measures. Later that morning, Marcus was in Bennett's office when Brian, in plain clothes and with a cardboard box in hand, came to collect his final belongings. Brian finally turned to Marcus, his face drawn. "Mr. Davis, I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for things to turn out like this." "It's not about what you meant, Officer Harkins," Marcus replied, his voice even. "It's about what you did, and the impact it had. Intentions don't excuse actions." Brian flinched, but he nodded, a flicker of understanding finally in his eyes. "I know." He paused, then gave a weary nod to both Marcus and Bennett. "Good luck, Captain, and to you as well, Mr. Davis." As Brian left, the door closing softly behind him, Marcus and Bennett were left in a thoughtful silence. The conflict was over, but the real work was just beginning. It was a turning point, not a conclusion, and with a glimmer of hope, Marcus knew he would be there to help guide it every step of the way.